Welcome to The Explainer. If you look around at our movies, our TV shows, and especially our music, you're going to see a recurring theme, right? It's this idea of being utterly, hopelessly addicted to love. We throw that phrase around casually all the time, but is it just a catchy metaphor, or is there a genuine psychological phenomenon going on here? Well, let's dive into the research and figure out exactly what happens when our natural human drive for connection goes into overdrive.
I mean, just look at these lyrics from Kesha. Your love is my drug. I get so high when you're with me, but crash and crave you when you leave. We see the exact same kind of language in songs by Britney Spears, Robert Palmer, Mariah Carey. They all describe romance using the literal vocabulary of substance abuse. Hits, highs, crashes, cravings, the whole shebang. Okay, let's dive into this because these everyday pop lyrics are actually the absolute perfect bridge into how our brains really process romantic attachment.
So, here's our roadmap for today. First, the pop culture phenomenon. Second, defining the construct. Third, childhood and cultural roots. Fourth, the clinical debate. And finally, number 5, paths to healing.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the pop culture phenomenon.
To make sure we're grounding our exploration in actual science, today's explainer is guided strictly by a fascinating master's thesis from Smith College by Zahara Levin. Levin conducted these incredible, in-depth qualitative interviews with mental health professionals out in the San Francisco Bay Area, specifically licensed clinical social workers and marriage and family therapists. So we're really looking at this through the lens of the actual clinicians who sit in rooms of people struggling with these relationship patterns every single day. Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds into defining the construct. What exactly is love addiction?
So, the crucial point here is how we actually define this. Clinically, love addiction is framed as a romantic style where an individual feels a compulsive, repetitive lack of agency which causes significant distress in their daily functioning. It's not just, having a really big crush on someone. It's about a total loss of control. The key phrase to remember here is significant distress. Just like a chemical substance addiction, the behavior keeps going even when the person knows, for a fact, that it's having severe negative consequences on their life, their career, or their overall well-being.
Now, we've got to contrast that addiction definition with a psychological concept known as limerence. Limerence is that sort of love madness or intense infatuation that, let's be real, we've all probably felt at some point. When you first fall for someone, your brain just floods with dopamine. You get this natural neurobiological high. It's an evolutionary system basically designed to motivate us to bond. But the question clinicians ask is, where does normal romance end and pathology begin? If limerence is like a stream of naturally occurring amphetamines running through our brains, a love addict is someone who literally cannot tolerate it when that initial high inevitably begins to fade, and they compulsively seek to re-experience it.
Support groups like Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, or SLA, have actually identified very specific symptoms to help people self-diagnose. These include things like becoming emotionally attached unusually quickly, staying in highly painful relationships just to avoid loneliness, genuinely believing a romantic partner has the magical power to fix your internal problems, and using relationships primarily as an escape from the daily grind. Take a second and really reflect on that. Do you recognize these traits out there in society, or maybe even in people you know? It's basically a pattern of using another human being for emotional relief, much in the same way someone else might use a drink.
Moving right along to Section 3, childhood and cultural roots. What actually drives this?
When surveyed, literally 100% of the clinicians agreed on this one major point. An individual's early childhood experiences are highly significant here. People are often subconsciously doing one of two things. First, they're seeking what was absent. They're desperately looking for this idealized, perfect environment that their early caregivers failed to provide. Or second, they are recreating familiar childhood dynamics. And here's the kicker. Even if those early dynamics were abusive or neglectful, they feel familiar. And humans have this really strange tendency to seek out the familiar, hoping that this time they can somehow control the outcome.
Clinicians actually call this the search for a corrective emotional experience. There's an incredibly powerful clinical anecdote from our source material that highlights this perfectly. One clinician described a client who is compulsively spending thousands and thousands of dollars seeking out prostitutes, completely unable to stop despite facing literal financial and personal ruin. Well, through therapy, they uncovered that the client's mother had actually been a prostitute, so his compulsion wasn't really about sex at all. It was this subconscious, desperate attempt to find the mother figure he lacked, trying to correct a really deep childhood wound through his adult behaviors. Wow, right?
But it's not just childhood trauma, it's also our cultural conditioning. A clinician named Zelda noted how heavily our cultural narratives influence this, particularly for women.
She cited the Cinderella fairy tale that women are saved by Prince Charming. Many clinicians feel that women in our society are especially pressured by narratives that tell them their core identity is tied to being in a relationship, or that they should just endlessly suffer and sacrifice to prove their love for a man. These archetypes of idealized love set impossibly high expectations that, frankly, real human beings can never actually meet.
Which brings us to the core mystery of our explainer in Section 4, the clinical debate. With all these symptoms, do therapists actually agree that love addiction is real?
Well, the short answer is a resounding no. The consensus among mental health professionals is surprisingly fragmented. When clinicians were surveyed, only 25% firmly believe love addiction is a valid clinical construct. Another 37.5% were highly ambivalent. 25% said they'd only use the term if the client brought it up first, and 12.5% strictly do not believe it exists at all.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how divided the psychiatric community really is. You might assume that therapy is super black and white, but diagnosing human emotion is incredibly gray. A lot of professionals feel deeply uncomfortable slapping an addiction label onto the fundamental human desire for love.
So let's impartially break down this debate. On the pro side, giving it the label of addiction completely normalizes the struggle. It provides immense relief to patients who suddenly realize they aren't alone, and it gives them a proven 12-step framework to achieve some stability. But on the con side, critics argue that this pathologizes a perfectly natural human drive. Furthermore, calling it a simple addiction might severely oversimplify complex childhood trauma, kind of ignoring deeper issues like depression, insecure attachment, or past abuse that actually need addressing.
And all of this leads us to what we can call the abstinence paradox. This is the major clinical conundrum here. Think about it. If you're addicted to alcohol, the goal is to stop drinking alcohol. But if you're addicted to love, what on earth do you do? Humans are biologically hardwired as social creatures to seek connection. We literally need relationships to survive and thrive. You cannot just abstain from human connection without causing severe psychological damage. So this makes traditional sobriety nearly impossible to define in the context of love addiction.
Let's move into our final section, Section 5, Paths to Healing. What do therapists actually do about this?
Regardless of whether they love or hate the term love addiction, pretty much all the clinicians agreed on the insight-oriented steps to guide individuals back to health. First, they gently probe the patient to lessen their denial about the negative consequences of their relationships. Second, they focus heavily on self-growth, really helping the client build internal security so they don't view a partner as their only source of worth. And third, they empower the client's sense of agency. It's not about just forcing a breakup, it's about reminding the person that they have a choice, prioritizing their own self-respect over some idealized fantasy.
Which leaves us with this final profound question. Where do we draw the line between a beautiful, natural human instinct for connection and a pathological addiction? It is a super blurry line that sits on a very wide continuum of the human experience. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this deep dive into the research has given you a powerful new framework for understanding romance, culture, and the mind. It certainly leaves us all with a lot to ponder regarding the true nature of our own attachments, doesn't it? Until next time, keep learning and keep asking questions.